speaker will be Carol Smolenski, the Executive Director of ECPAT USA.
Thank you very much. I'd just like to start out by saying congratulations to Professor Lenzer for putting on together this amazing and fascinating day, this fascinating conference, and thank you for inviting me to speak on this amazing panel. Okay. I'm so happy to be here. I do a lot of speaking about the commercial sexual exploitation and sex trafficking of children. The perspectives, though, offered here today are not usually on the agenda. Prevention is not usually on the agenda for the conferences that I speak at. So that's why I'm finding this earth-shattering to be here and would love to be able to incorporate the perspectives that were here today in all of the work that we do. There's a lot on law enforcement, there's a lot on protection of kids, but prevention, not so much usually. In my few minutes here, I am going to talk a little bit about the disparity in laws that address the issue of commercial sexual exploitation, sex trafficking of children, a little bit about how kids get involved in the United States in sexual exploitation, and then what we should do about it. First of all, I've been doing this for 20 years now. ECPAT is an organization that is now represented in 73 countries. We started in Asia, working on the issue of sex trafficking of kids within Asia, and then rapidly realized that, hey, it's not just in Asia, it's not just sex tourism related, it's actually in all countries of the world, in all regions, and we really can't just talk about what's happening in Asia. Although it's only really in the last few years that Americans are starting to wake up to the fact that there is sex trafficking and sexual exploitation of children right here in the United States. So it's still, unfortunately, a thing that people say, oh yeah, they have that over there, don't they? Oh yeah, Asia, oh yeah, Latin America. But in fact, it's right here. Fact is, there are not a lot of good statistics about how big it is right here, and there's lots of fighting over methodologies and how to measure how much there is right here. So I barely dare to address the numbers of sexually exploited kids in the United States. I will say there was one study published 3 years ago by John Jay and College and Center for Court Innovation, estimating about 3,700 sexually exploited kids, both boys and girls, in New York City. I'll just leave that at that for right now. So in my world, the important perspectives, the important landmarks on the issue of sexual exploitation of children, one of them was in the year 2000, when U.S. Congress passed the Trafficking Victims Protection Act, the TVPA. It defines a victim of a severe form of trafficking as a person who, quote, has been involved in a commercial sexual act that is induced by force, fraud, or coercion, or, and this was the earth-shattering part for me working on the issue of sex trafficking of kids, or in which the person induced to perform such an act has not attained 18 years of age. It was mind-boggling, or has not attained 18 years of age. The definition meant that any kid in the United States who has not attained 18 years of age and induced to perform a commercial sex act is a victim of human trafficking. They don't have to have gone anywhere to be defined by federal law as a victim of human trafficking. Any kid sexually exploited in the United States is a victim of human trafficking, not a criminal. Oh my God. It took a few years for the communities that I work with to sort of really wrap our minds around that and start to work on, well then, why is it that sexually exploited kids in the United States are being arrested for prostitution if the federal government is now calling them victims of human trafficking under this definition? So we were recognizing that at the state level, criminal laws were still criminalizing kids for prostitution, arresting them and putting them through the criminal justice system, instead of seeing them as victims who needed attention and protection and assistance. Now, things have changed very much over the years, really starting with New York, which passed safe harbor law a few years ago. Safe harbor law, which puts in place a procedure for taking children from the criminal justice system and putting them into the child welfare system. And we are also starting to have, of course, some great prosecutors, such as Charles Hines here today, who are taking that work very seriously and doing the right thing by sexually exploited kids. But there are still lots of areas in the country where kids are seen in the criminal justice system and not seen as victims and really are seen as bad kids. We've done a lot of work to try to put in people's minds to shift the paradigm from seeing them as bad kids to seeing them as victims, as kids who need help, not bad kids. So we did a report, and there has been research now showing the trajectory of American kids into sexual exploitation. We have to explain this because of that mindset that they're bad kids. I mean, Americans often say, but they're not as poor as those Cambodian kids, so why would they be in sexual exploitation? They're not as poor as those Honduran kids, so they must be bad kids, right? And so we've done some research that shows the trajectory of children from families that have suffered lots of abuse and neglect and just breakdown and foster care and family violence as being the kids who are most vulnerable to sexual exploitation. The descriptions that were on the panel this morning is so fascinating to me because it's the kind of work that I feel like we have to incorporate into our work on preventing sexual exploitation of children. That those are the kids in foster care, runaway and homeless youth, kids who are somehow in the system are kids who are very often the kids who are targeted and recruited by pimps. Now, the supply side also has to do with pimps being out there looking for vulnerable kids. It's not just by accident that they find vulnerable kids, they're actually going out and looking for them. As one pimp in one of our reports put it, you've got to be a virtual psychologist, a manipulator, a dream seller. Another one said, most of them have been abused sexually by their parents, been raped so many times they feel they might as well get money for it. Well, it's my job to teach them that it's better to get paid for it than to do it for free. So there's kids who are at risk, there's pimps who are looking for them, and then there are people who really want to buy sex from young women and young girls. When we talk about sexual exploitation of children in the United States, it's important to point out that there is not this division between the sex market of kids under 18 and the market of 18 plus prostitution market. Pimps are recruiting any kid, any girl who's already developed and just putting them into the market. For example, we just finished a 20-minute educational video about sexual exploitation of children, focusing on one victim who had been recruited at age 16. Her pimp had 5 girls who worked for him between the ages of 15 and 25. It's not that the under 18s are a different market, it's those bad pedophiles. Frankly, it means any man who is in the market, in the sexual exploitation market, may very well be a sex exploiter, whether he recognizes it or not, or society recognizes it or not. It may very well be that he has a 15, 12, 18, 20-year-old girl or woman that he has purchased. I can't help including this little anecdote in this panel today. Last winter, my 16-year-old daughter was we live in Brooklyn, was hanging out on Flatbush Avenue with a couple of her boyfriends, and a guy came up to her and her friends and tried to get my daughter, to go with him. And, he was mostly talking to her boyfriends and saying, let her come with me. They all just sort of laughed it off, and he went away, and he came back a few minutes later, and he said to my daughter's boyfriends, I'll give you $100 and an ounce of weed for you to let her come with me. So I say that to describe just how mainstream pimp recruitment is. Right out in the open, right on Flatbush Avenue, middle-class neighborhood, kids of all types are at risk. Now, a kid with a different upbringing from the type my daughter had, might very well have been recruited into prostitution right then and there. And I won't talk that much about how they stay in prostitution, but vulnerable kids who don't have much chance in life are kids who are very open to the persuasions of staying in prostitution. Just like with domestic violence victims, why didn't she just leave? Why didn't you just leave? You often hear there's a system of abuse and affection that pimps use to keep their girls in line. Okay, I know that I have to wrap up. I want to just talk about the need for safe harbor laws in states all around the country, and perhaps even strengthening safe harbor in New York. The need for services for sexually exploited kids is off the map. One of the reasons that the systems have been putting them into the criminal justice system is because really there's no place else to put them. And at least they're away from the pimp. At least that's the explanation. And a good explanation it is. There is legislation that's been introduced in Congress. We hope that it passes, that would create for the first time a stream of funding for services for sexually exploited kids in the United States. It would create a system of 6 safe houses around the country. We're also working with the private sector. I know I don't have much more time, but we're working with the hotel industry to put in place certain protections so that they are not inadvertently facilitating sexual exploitation of children on their premises. This year, Hilton signed for 2 cities. We're hoping they will do it in New York City next. Stay tuned, all of you, for that. Love to work with you on trying to put pressure on them to do that. Wyndham Hotels signed. Carlson, which owns Radisson, had previously signed. This is the ECPAT's 20th anniversary. I have seen huge changes over the years in awareness, law enforcement, legislation, and protection, but we still have a long, long way to go. Thank you.
I guess I've been given the responsibility of being the anchor and kind of pulling all of this together. And I must say, and I'm sure we all feel the same way, that the insight and information that we've been getting this afternoon is absolutely incredible and very, very important. I look out and I see some of the assistant district attorneys in New York County, no offense to the Brooklyn district attorneys, where I served the last 15 years. I had the responsibility of resolving the cases of all the 13, 14, and 15-year-old kids who were being prosecuted as adults because they were charged with the most serious crimes under our juvenile offender law. And one of the things that I always tried to do was to interact as best I could within the legal boundaries with every young person that came before me. So I would engage them in conversation, and many of the lawyers always knew, the things that I liked and the things, my routine, if you will. So one lawyer came in one morning and said, "Judge, I want you to know my client is reading," because he knew I liked to hear that young people were reading. And I love Dickens. Dickens is one of my favorite authors. And he said, "My client is reading." I said, "Well, what's he reading?" "He's reading A Tale of Two Cities." I said, "A Tale of Two Cities?" I said, that's terrific, young man." I said, "What did you think of it was the best of times and it was the worst of times?" And he paused and he said, "It's in the book." And he said, "I didn't get that far." So I hope those of you who are literary scholars, or at least remember probably the most famous opening lines in literature. But nevertheless, it was a good try, and I didn't hold him, I didn't penalize him for it. I think we had a kind of interesting colloquy afterwards. However, what I hear today, what I see by the panelists, I know that we have the best efforts to address these issues, but it is also the worst of times. And how does, when do we see the victims of child abuse again? Well, from my perspective, I saw them again when they were 14, 15 years of age and accused of a serious crime. And the link between child abuse, witnessing it, experiencing it, and committing offenses is quite significant. And as our luncheon speaker said today, it is a key factor for young people who engage in violence to get what they want or think that they need, those who have witnessed violence or experienced violence in their own youth. And let me just give you two quick examples of how these issues came to the surface with respect to young people who appeared in my court. 7-year-old girl answers the knock on the door to her apartment. It's her father who's estranged from her mother. He says, "Go get your mother." The little girl runs into the kitchen, tugs at the mother's apron. "Mommy, Daddy's at the door." The mother goes to the door, the little girl trailing behind her. Father takes a can of gasoline he was hiding, douses the mother from head to toe with the can of gasoline, lights her on fire. She's horribly burned, disfigured. 8 years later, this little girl's in front of me for putting a gun to somebody's head and saying, "Give me your money or I'll shoot you." And who comes to lobby me for this little girl? But the very prosecutor who remembered prosecuting her father for attempting to murder her mother, and remember this little girl sitting in his office, and he was talking to her to get a sense of what had happened, and then turning to her mother and saying, "You know, you got to get this little girl help. She's been traumatized by what happened. She feels responsible in some way because she got you to bring you to her father. You've got to get her this kind of help." And of course, the mother, overcome with her own issues, was unable to get her own help. And now this little girl's in front of me. So how many years do I put her in jail for? What is the extent of her culpability? And how can we judge her simply by the nature of her offense without looking as to how she got here? 6-year-old girl walking down the street holding her mother's hand. Again, father crosses the street, comes over, accuses the mother of having an affair with his best friend, takes out a switchblade knife, slashes her across the face, stabs her in the chest several times. The mother falls to the ground dead, still holding the little girl's hand. 8 years later, this little girl's in front of me for slashing the face of a rival girlfriend over a boy. How many years do we put her in jail for? What can we do? How can we react, respond in an adult criminal justice system which holds young people criminally liable, which criminalizes them very often for their victimization? And so what we need is a systemic response that recognizes the developmental differences of children, that responds to it with sensitive, developmentally sensitive programming, and gives them room to reform. And so all of this conversation today is so important, so relevant. The idea of prevention, the idea of intervening, the idea of following these young people when they go through a wonderful program like District Attorney Hines described for you. But where are they 10 years out? And so it's important for us to recognize that this is all interrelated. And I think, Carol, you made some very telling points about the idea. I love this definition of sexual exploitation, that if you're under 18 years of age, you simply cannot be sexually exploited, even if someone from the outside is looking at it as if you voluntarily engaged in this conduct which we've described as prostitution and criminalized. And that is the idea that's behind so many of our efforts to look at the juvenile offender law, which criminalizes young people at 14 and 15 years of age for their mistakes, and the fact that New York is one of only 2 states in the entire nation that prosecutes children as young as 16 automatically as adults. And these 2 laws provide a certain inflexibility to the system for us those of us who are trying to develop sensitive responses to the issues that they present in a way that protects society in the long run. So I think what I'd love to do is to give the audience an opportunity to interact with our speakers because they were so wonderful and have such great insights. And we have a little time because unfortunately Felipe Franco, who was to be our speaker, is unable to be here today. So we can take questions from the audience. We have a little time. Where is that? Crescent, yes?
Assemblywoman Clark goes first.
I have a microphone, so I'll ask the question. I'm glad you here presenting. Judge Corriero participated in a workshop we had at the Black and Hispanic and Asian and all the members of the caucus over the winter break when we had it in Albany. And we talked about this issue. My question to Judge Corriero is, I'm waiting for you to decide when we should introduce this bill so that we can start trying to move that issue. And I don't know, because it's your issue, I don't know what you're doing with it.
Okay, no, really, thank you.
But I want to do it.
I
want it to happen in New York State.
I don't know if all of you are aware of Judge Lippman's recent juvenile justice proposal. Judge Lippman announced that he was in favor of raising the age of criminal responsibility for certain young people who were accused of nonviolent offenses, and actually called upon my organization and myself to work with his sentencing commission to draft legislation to implement his vision. His vision focuses on young people accused of nonviolent offenses. And when I spoke in February in Albany, I talked about all children under 18 years of age and developing a process that helps us to identify more clearly the most dangerous of those offenders. So I say to you, Assembly person, no, I say to you, go full speed ahead. Okay. Do what you think is right. And we'll come up with a bill through the Sentencing Commission, and then we'll see where it all shakes out as we go forward. It's going to be an interesting legislative session. So I don't want to inhibit you in any way from moving forward with your progressive agenda. Is that all right with you, Jan?
I just want to add the second part to Judge Lippman's piece, and maybe you should add it, but that he is implementing pilot programs across the state to actually sort of treat those offenders as if
he's
they
creating,
were...
I believe, 9 adolescent intervention parks throughout the state. Right. Buffalo, Syracuse, and each of the boroughs near, which I think is also a very significant movement forward in this issue.
That wasn't what I was originally going to ask, though. So what I was going to originally ask was, I'm Liberty Aldrich from the Center for Court Innovation. So we worked on the study on commercially sexually exploited youth. And one of the things that was very controversial, it is very controversial, one of the things that it did raise was that I think there are a large number of boys who are also commercially sexually exploited, and yet they don't seem to end up in the criminal justice system at the same, hardly at all. And I was wondering, DA Hines is gone, but the STAR program is for girls. No, it's not for girls. Oh, it's not for girls? Okay, but, and so that's what I was gonna ask is, how many boys end up going through? We've had some boys. But not anywhere near the number. Not as many as women, but we certainly have had boys go through. Okay. I just, the reason I think it's interesting to think about is what are the sort of different patterns that are leading the girls to end up more frequently in the criminal justice system than the boys, and are there other ways that we could be reaching out to the boys and trying to get them into services and other tools to address it, since the criminal justice response isn't probably the best response for either the boys or the girls?
Ronnie, do you want to answer that?
Well, we give our services in STAR, as I said, to boys and girls. We've had a fair amount of boys. In terms of why more girls are arrested, I think more girls are under the
thing. Did you work on this study? Oh, okay. Because my memory is that the study says that boys are arrested, but not for prostitution, more likely for drugs or something like that. And I imagine, I mean, I don't think that the study speculates on why that is, but I imagine it's because boys don't look like what a quote prostitute looks like, and so, you know, criminal justice system sees a prostitute as a woman in a short skirt, you know, and that's prostitution. And boys, it's just different. You know, the issue of boys who are sexually exploited is so completely understudied and so completely under the radar. We're actually just doing a little study about who these boys are and what they need and what to do to prevent sexual exploitation of boys, etc. But really, nobody's doing anything on that subject. We have a long way to go.
I just have to say one thing. We are actually working on a project in the 8th Precinct in Brooklyn on a full transgender prostitution area, targeted area, working with the police department, with vice, and with the 8th Precinct on this topic. So we are actually doing it. You can't hear me? We're actually doing it right now.
Yes.
Hi, good afternoon. One question. I'm from New York City Children's Services. Thank you very much for this very informative presentation. I was impressed by the presentation, as troubling as it was, by the representative from Children's Rights, Inc., and about the improvements in some of the systems that you referenced. The difficulty around identifying foster homes, the shortage of foster homes that you talked about, is always a challenge for jurisdictions, and it's a challenge in New York. And we have tried all sorts of creative ways to find foster homes throughout the city. In fact, prior to my arriving at ACS, the agency won an award from GLAAD just recently for a campaign in the city to appeal to LGBTQ affirming homes. So the city's been recognized for its work in this area. My question is, what has CRI found in the jurisdictions where you have done your groundbreaking work that has been successful to find safe, good foster homes for young people?
Yeah, and I would say, first of all, that it's certainly far easier to criticize as a system-wide civil rights class action litigator than to be implementing the solution. So I certainly respect the challenge and the difficulty of that problem in every system. It's absolutely true. What we've been trying to do more recently is try to facilitate the sharing of what we call what works studies in systems that have used particular tools to achieve success on certain of these issues, because no one system gets all of them right for any period of time, and to hold them together, it's so challenging. And so, for example, there's a publication called What Works, where we highlighted how Tennessee went from a reliance on almost 30% of its entire foster care population in facilities, orphanage-style group homes and institutions, to 8%, and how they did that. And I'd be happy to share that with you. Some of them may work in a particular city or state, some may not. A lot has to do with shifting money towards support. Obviously, folks know that institutional care for kids, aside from being harmful and against any best practice, except in the most extreme cases, is 5 to 10 times more expensive than providing foster care and wraparound services to provide families for kids. Also, because facilities work in shifts, you deprive children of the single largest source of adoptive homes, right, which is anywhere from 70 to 80% of adoptions are from foster families. So you're not only wasting taxpayer money if you're in a system that's over-relying on congregate care and hurting kids, you're making it more certain that they will grow up in foster care. So everything from shifting the resources to motivating bricks and mortar providers of congregate care to move into the incentivized field of foster care recruitment doing data-driven, targeted recruitment techniques that not only reflect the foster care population, but what the foster parent population is willing to take in. Connecticut, the new commissioner there, who has shown to be an extraordinary manager, I'm sure you know her.
I actually know her, and you're probably aware that New York City, under Commissioner Mattingly's leadership, reduced congregate care by 60%, and the young people who have been placed on delinquency cases in the past 8 years has been reduced from 1,500 to just over 500, and Judge Corriero is very familiar with that work. So we obviously have tried to do that work, but finding foster homes continues to be a struggle for us, even with a reduced foster care census. So I'm just wondering if there's work in Georgia that's been done, or Massachusetts that has been, you know, what I think is so interesting is that the onus seems to continue in all systems across the country, as I talk to commissioners, to be on the child welfare system to find foster homes, when it isn't on the greater community to find homes for our children. And yet, when there is an incident of, you know, Daily News or New York Post proportions, there isn't a conversation that gets larger around where these children that are our children should go when they need protection, which I think is fascinating.
It is fascinating, and it's a fair point that you make. I would just leave you with one other comment that I learned from former Supreme Court Judge Joette Katz in Connecticut, and she had found the data that said that something like 30% of the foster families that left the system didn't do so because they adopted or something was wrong in the care they were providing. It was because they didn't feel respected by the agency. So she got in front of it very recently with an initiative that's all around simple respect, a very cost-neutral initiative, to be sure. And I think it could really bear fruit, not even getting a call back when you need help from your caseworker, things like that. I think there are some folks that are pushing the envelope on some of these creative solutions, partially because of the economic times, but some of them make a lot of common sense.
Yeah,
Thank you.
You have someone on your panel who, I mean, the Children's Aid Society is a model of respect for foster parents, so I think...
And we're struggling too to recruit the number of homes that are needed for especially special needs kids and teens and large sibling groups. So I would have to agree with the commissioner that we need help. The agencies can't do it alone. The city can't do it alone. It's a real problem.
Connecticut has a fantastic new commissioner. She really is. She's something, and she is a former appellate judge. So it's interesting that governors and mayors are picking judges to run child welfare systems.
Thank you, Commissioner Richter. Thank you very much. Judge Richter. Senator Clark? Oh, I'm sorry. Right there.
Hi, good afternoon, and congratulations again. This is really a very dynamic discussion. My name is Maureen Archibald. I'm head of contracts with the Adoption Agency in Central New Jersey, Office of Full Family Services. And the model we practice is faith-based recruiting, foster care and adoption, going to different houses of worship to recruit to meet the needs that we spoke about earlier. My question actually is directed to Carol around sex trafficking, because in fact we do know that the children reaching out to foster care also is a large percentage of the sex trafficking. And I comment also that Martin earlier was speaking about pregnant families and her work in keeping children and returning them to families. Can you speak though to the issue of children reaching out to foster care? Of course we know those are our most vulnerable population. With a lot of resources, they also become caught up in sex trafficking. The percentage is there. What can we do to put services in place to prevent that from happening to that population?
I'm not exactly an expert on that, but no question that kids in foster care and aging out of foster care are some of the most vulnerable population. In fact, one of the trafficking victims, the Federal Trafficking Victims Protection Act has to be reauthorized every 3 years. It's been introduced for its latest reauthorization, and it does include one little component that would expand foster care, that would call on states to expand foster care up through 21 foster care services. Now, all of the foster care experts in the room would ask me mechanics about what that means and how that works, and I don't know. But I only know that there is a recognition of that vulnerability of that population, both before and after kids are 18, they're vulnerable. And it does speak to the divide over the argument over prostitution, that under 18 kids should be protected from it, but 18 years old and up, then they're criminally liable for it. And that's a whole other very controversial divide in my world on the issue of sex trafficking.
May I make one comment? And that is, it occurs to me that in your folder, you will find the publication of the Children's Studies Child Policy Forum of 2009, which deals with the treaty that the United States has not only signed but ratified, which is the additional protocol to the Convention on the Rights of the Child on the sale of children, child prostitution, and child pornography. So in other words, not only do we have federal statutes and state statutes, but we also, the United States is a state party to this international treaty, and in the sense, therefore, is obligated to implement the provisions of this international treaty. So I just would like to add to Carol's a point that we have additional important statutory provisions that we must observe with regard to child trafficking, sale of children, child prostitution, and pornography of children. And that's part of the larger international treaty on the rights of the child. I'm sorry that I...
Richard, there's another question there.
Yeah.
The woman has been raising it.
I'll speak very loudly. I was hoping that the judge could talk about your adjudication decisions of those two cases.
What happened?
Your decision, what it was.
Absolutely. I'm glad you asked the question. Because with the cooperation, and only because of the cooperation of the district attorney with respect to the first case, because that was a robbery in the first degree charge and allegedly there was a weapon, only with the cooperation of the district attorney were we able to resolve it, where she ultimately received no criminal record. She received youthful offender treatment. She remained in for about 4 months in the juvenile detention center. And then we placed her in a program for approximately a year. We monitored her behavior. And then I placed her on probation, and she never violated probation as far as I know. And I believe she eventually got a good job and stayed out of continued trouble. But she got the mental health intervention that she needed, but it was only because of the cooperation of the district attorney. Because had the district attorney taken a firm stand in opposition to youthful offender treatment, I probably could not have sustained granting her youthful offender treatment simply because she was 14 and had witnessed such a horrible act. I don't think the appellate division would have found that to be mitigation. And so she would have incurred a criminal record and then had to have mandatory imprisonment. As far as the other young lady, that was a little bit more complicated because we had another little girl who was scarred as a result of her behavior. So again, because we had such a wonderful camaraderie in the youth part and a commonality, if you will, of mission, I was able to persuade the parties to let me have a kind of an informal conference, which included the victim and her mother, the defense lawyer, who was not permitted to ask the victim and her mother any questions, but was there, and as well as the prosecutor. And we talked about what the victim and her mother expected and wanted to see happen in the case. And very often victims have expectations that we can't meet in the criminal justice system. They'd like to see certain things happen, but we can't meet them. And ultimately, we determined that what the victim and her mother wanted most was to feel secure that this, number one, this young woman would not revisit the violence that she did on this young girl, and also receive the kind of treatment that they thought was necessary in order to let her deal with her issues in a much better way. And so again, we kind of split the baby, if you will. We kept her in for a little while, about 6 months. Of course, I've abused the Horizon and the Juvenile Detention Center for my little sentencing alternatives. We kept her in for a while. We placed her in a program. Again, we monitored for a year. Again, eventually, with the consent of all the parties, we gave her youthful and the way we were able to do that is because I demonstrated that I would have control over this young woman for at least 7 years of her life, when she was 14 through 21, 22, by keeping her in for a while, placing her in a program for a year, monitoring her, and then placing her on probation for 5 years, and making sure that I was in touch with the probation officer and had an ongoing dialogue with probation so that we knew that we could oversee her behavior. She didn't violate probation. She did smoke marijuana. She became pregnant and eventually succeeded in finishing probation without any additional crimes of violence. But all of that was done with a lot of imaginative and trying to improvisation, if you will, of a system that doesn't have the kind of flexibility to deal accurately with these issues. And what we really need is an element of judicial responsiveness with the consent of the district attorney in the more serious cases, where the judges of the adult court would have the authority to place children in mental health institutions just as they do in the family court. The adult court judges are at a disadvantage of not having those family court-oriented therapeutic interventions available to them. Does that answer your question?
Sounds like the path was restored justice.
Yes, it was.
Another question from Assemblywoman Clark.
Thank you. I'm going to
Stand up and face the audience a minute. My name is Barbara Clark. I'm a member of the New York State Legislature. I've been there for 25 years. I've served on the Committee for Children and Families for 25 years. That was the first, education was the first one I requested. Children and Families was the second. I've been there. That was 25 years. I have to tell you, it's a frustrating place to be, because doing the things that I think we need to do for children does not happen. So, I'm here to ask a question. The question I have is, since, who said that poverty, you are right, poverty is a major, poverty, okay, thanks, is a major reason for children going into foster care. And I hate foster care. I know it's a blessing for many children, but I hate the idea. But
I know
you don't have places for them to go. Thank God we have.
It in public and private. It's okay.
I thank God we have foster care. But if poverty is an issue, using the same money that we spend with foster care, why can't we use that to help parents? And I'll give you a couple of examples. I had a loving couple come into my office once with 4 children, and their house was a mess because they could not do anything to fix the house. The 4 children were taken away from them, even with my effort. Now, in my mind, we had one commissioner of ACS that did some stuff about that, but she didn't last long. I'm not calling any names. She didn't last long because she would help fix the house, or whatever had to be done to help that family keep their own children. So for me, I have begun to believe the children are an industry in New York State. That's how I feel about it. And I know I'm not making anybody happy when I say that. But the reality is, if poverty is a major issue, is there a way that we could retool how we do things and help those parents who have these struggles? And I could give you examples of children and families that I've helped in my office that could have used the money to fix their homes or just have some support to stay together, particularly a single mother of 4 children, people like that cannot get that help, that cry to say, well, I'm living in this place where there's rats and I can't get the landlord to do anything, and if my children get bitten by a rat, they're going to take my children away from me. And now I'm fighting with the landlord, not in my borough, in another. it's a frustrating place to be, but this is what we're dealing with. I'm telling all of you, so maybe all of us together could do something to try to support children staying with their families. The last thing I want to tell you is the prison system will not ask the question, when a person is admitted to a prison facility, have you ever lived in foster care? They won't ask that question. And I'm going to try to pass a law to force them to ask the question, because I want to know whether foster care is helping as much as we want to believe it's helping, or if it's not. We should be able to determine whether it's working or not. And I know some fantastic cases. I know professors who grew up in foster care. So I know there are some good things, but I'm talking about the massive number of people. And I have some serious questions about that. I have a bill. Dr. Lindsay came, where is she? Came to me with the child, I'm not on the panel, child advocate bill. And guess what? I've passed it and it has gotten vetoed. And guess what? The agencies don't want it. A bill that would the other bill that I had was a bill that actually would notify children, adopted parent of special needs children, as to what benefits they would not get if, in fact, they adopted this child. So it had created major problems with husbands and wives who adopted children with special needs, because once they realized certain services they weren't going to have, they, ran into real problems, and they would fight about it. Divorce actually has taken place. I passed the bill twice. It's been vetoed twice. Why? Biggest statewide agencies there is comes up at the last minute. They don't come to me. Comes up at the last minute and issues the governor a letter as to why this should not happen. Tell me, why does that happen? So this is the biggest audience I could ever find. Anybody who'd like to ever come and talk to me about it, that could help me at all, I really would appreciate it.
That's great.
Thank you.
But I would like to give Jane an opportunity to respond to your question.
Yes, thank you. So what I wanted to share is that a couple of years ago, the City Administration for Children's Services, under the leadership of Commissioner John Mattingly, did something very progressive that I have never seen done before. I'm hoping it can continue, which was that he reinvested some of the funds that had been saved because of the dramatic reduction in the census of the foster care population in New York City, and freed up dollars that we at Children's Aid Society decided we would like to use to work with the parents of the children who were coming into foster care. And I think it's reinvestment and progressive budgeting that is required to allow us to use the dollars that are now used to support a very large child welfare system, not only in New York, but around the country, in a much more flexible way, so that we can provide the services that kids need to stay home with their parents. So there is something very progressive going on in New York City. It's not enough. Each year we've received cuts in the amount of the reinvestment dollars that we get, but the good news is that the program has remained for the past 5 or 6 years, and I think that's something we can be proud of in New York City and that we need to advocate to do more of.
I want to just respond in terms of the juvenile justice system, the idea of working with the families. I mean, it is called the family court, and that's an important concept. It is, when a kid gets into trouble, then you also want to look at the family and the family context. And so, for example, the New York Foundling has the evidence-based program, multi-systemic therapy, functional family therapy. In other words, putting a social, when a kid gets into trouble, to look at not only the kid, but the family context and the environment, and making sure that the family can function in a way that will help that child abide by whatever responses are going to come out of the family court. And I think it also rests on that idea that it's preferable to resolve these issues within the biological family or the family than in the foster care system. Yes, yeah. Yes, I am. wish I was a football player, you know, they have these great eyes, they see.
A couple of comments kind of in response to both of these. One is all of the kinds of programs like multi-systemic family therapy and so forth are really, really essential. What I heard was something kind of even more basic. Am I not doing something right here? Oh, there we go. I heard something even more basic. And at least, I'm not sure what's going on with the family assessment response in Child Protective down in New York City, but in some of the upstate counties, one of the most impactful things has been for family assessment response workers simply to have pots, little pots of money for actual just material needs that families have, which for many of the families has made a tremendous difference. So sometimes the services, once you get to the need for the therapeutic services, but sometimes, I think we really haven't grappled with kind of the basic, yeah, we can spend $40,000 on foster care, or couldn't we have freed up a couple $1,000s just to see that families have what they need? And because the other thing I want to mention in terms of cost compared to foster care is, we just, from my point of view, I'm from Prevention of Abuse New York, from my point of view, we have hardly touched on actual prevention, getting there a little bit. But prevention to me is before kids are abused. So one of the things we know, and many of you are familiar with the kinds of programs, prenatal early childhood home visiting programs. Here in New York City, there's both Nurse Family Partnership and Healthy Families New York. You can help a family, a child and family, through those programs. You can help 5 to 7 families for the same amount of money that you can keep one kid in foster care. So that's another useful statistic.
Thank you very much. Yes, Professor. You have a microphone?
I'll bring it over.
Thank you. Unfortunately, I guess this will have to be our last question.
It's been interesting to me in the course of the day to hear how much dumping on the foster care system and on foster care parents has gone on. So I wonder how many people in the room have ever had a child that they've been foster parents for. So I had a foster child. Luckily, we got him right out of the hospital as a newborn, and we cared for him and loved him. And the foster care system made it extremely difficult. It was an emotionally very trying time for us, and given how well connected I and my family and my friends are, I'm a professor at Columbia University, I was able to find a judge who helped me get him out of the foster care system and adopted after trying for years. So now that I'm much older and the child is on his own, has a great job in Manhattan, it's all a success story, I'm much more mature in my view of what goes on. And I usually just follow the money. So the problem in the foster care system isn't necessarily that the parents of foster care children are doing anything at all wrong. But if you follow the money, the foster care agencies make it extremely difficult to take care of those children. And they seem to have a very strong vested interest in holding on to those children. So if we want to tackle those problems, I suggest we look at how the foster care system is organized and funded. And that might bring us a lot more return than even tackling the welfare system. Thank you.
Did I miss anyone this time? Great. Thank you all very much. I really